I make a
So,
big deal in my teaching about breath work, not just learning breathing techniques, but being part of a community.
Yes.
yeah.
Whatever you can get from breathing techniques is
Mhm.
exponentially multiplied when you're doing it with a community of
So true.
like-spirited beings. And
Aw.
that's what I'm seeing here.
Thank you,
Mm,
Jim.
it's
Can
so
I
true.
introduce you as the beautiful, amazing Jim Morningstar that you are? We've had the privilege of working with you, meeting you, seeing you live at the conferences. And so I wanted to say to a little bit to the audience about who this incredible being is that we're going to get to listen more to. And Jim is the director of Transformations Incorporated in Wisconsin, and he's been a clinical psychologist since 1973. Clinical supervisor, seminar leader, and is a pioneer in the development of therapeutic breathwork. And he founded the School of Integrative Psychology in 1980 and the Transformations Breathworker Training Program in 1990. He's authored 5 books in the field of integrative psychology, and he is the co-director of the Global Professional Breathwork Alliance, the GPBA, the International Organization for Professionalism, Ethics, I want to say that 3 times, and training standards in breathwork, and which we are honored and so proud to be accredited by. Jim teaches internationally, and he is here
Mm,
with us. Let's give him an
mm.
applause. Let's really
Yay, let's
acknowledge that.
send him lots of good energy. Thank you for taking time to be with us today. And I wanted to ask you, Jim, since you've been around psychology and transformational healing arts for decades, you've gone through many movements. How do you see breath work as a vital tool for this time, especially as it relates to kind of our individual and collective trauma that we're all processing? Why is breathwork like one of the fastest growing modalities right now? Tell us what you see.
Well, as you already set the stage, I go way back in terms of my training, and I devoted 5 years of my life to becoming a psychotherapist, a clinical psychologist. And that lasted 1 day because I knew after all that training, I did not want to be a talking head, just verbally going through people's issues with them. By the way, back in those days, we didn't have one class on trauma.
Yeah.
There was very little known about trauma at that time, other than veterans coming back from the war with shell shock, as it was called. And so it was just about extreme cases. But when I finally found a type of practice that involved the body, that involved somatic work, I said, okay, I'm back online. I'm going to be healing and working with people now because we can use the body. But what came to me in my practice in the early 70s and 80s were people with a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
And for the most part, just at that time, childhood sexual abuse was just starting to be validated. Because as you know, when it first started to be revealed, there was a big backlash. They called it false memories. And people who had and recounted instances through their body of abuse were invalidated,
Right.
doubling their trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So my classes, my individual practice began to be filled with people with such life circumstances because I wasn't about invalidating them. I was about listening and learning from them
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because we didn't have trauma-informed therapy at the time, but we did have somatic tools, bioenergetics and breath work. And so these are things that would address people in their body.
Mm-hmm.
And with breath work, we found that we were able to get to and release some of those early memories, those traumatic memories. But if we overdid it, and
Right.
force
Mhm.
people to breathe too fast, too hard. Re-traumatization. On the other
Yeah.
hand, if we just were scared of it and pulled back and, oh, just tell me about your ancestry and, talk verbally, well, we didn't scratch the surface.
Right.
I learned from my clients.
That's how it should be. Right. Mhm.
Now
Mhm.
we're finding out why it worked. And to answer your question with that long-winded introduction, why it's so important right now is that we're finding out that we can consciously and carefully activate the right brain where trauma is stored, but doing it with respect for the pace and the stages
Yes.
needed by the client, we can reprogram that
Yes.
trauma.
Yes.
Now, it's no longer in the category of just things that we consider, everyone would consider trauma, like a major automobile accident or having your parents die before your eyes in a firing squad, or things, horrible things. Of course, everyone, but we're finding out now that trauma is not what happened, but how the nervous system reacts to what happened. And
Right.
so you could have had a dental procedure as a child.
Right.
You could have had
Cons-
any number of things, a fall down the stairs, a bicycle accident, any number of things that your nervous system was overwhelmed by, and now becomes a holding pattern in your body.
Right.
And why it's needed right now is because we're discovering how much trauma there is
Right.
in the world and how everyone has some form of it. And now everyone has the ability to learn self-healing techniques, not
Mhm.
become dependent on drugs, not
Mhm.
become dependent even on a practitioner. And so
Wow.
our business is helping people discover the healer within.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
And if there's
Mhm.
anything that's needed on the planet now, that's it.
Important message. Thank you
Mhm.
so much, Jim. I have
Thank you,
chills, like
Jim.
to
Mhm.
remember that we didn't even know about trauma really back then. And
Mhm.
we're living in a time where there's so much trauma-informed information coming out, and breathwork is taking its place in that. So I know Dana
Yeah.
has another question for you.
I do. Yeah, I'm just intrigued. Just love hearing all your wisdom, Jim. And we know that the second question, like, breathwork has been around for decades, and but it's even become more mainstream. And there's a need, as we know, for higher training and ethical standards. And so we're so grateful for the GPBA. We've even heard of people taking a weekend workshop and start giving breath sessions. And so, as part of the GPBA Global Professional Breathwork Alliance, you require a 400 plus hour training in breathwork. And can you speak to us about why it's so important to have high training standards, ethical standards for breathwork certification?
Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
speak to us about that?
And
Absolutely.
thank you for your pioneering work. We know that
Yeah.
it's been a labor of love for you and Jessica Dibbs
Oh
to
my
bring forth
gosh.
these ethical standards. And we're so proud to be a part of the GPBA board with
And
you.
we're so proud to have you,
Aw.
because that's what we are looking for. It's people who've had the experience, but people who learned from it, and people who then modified their trainings to help make competency the issue rather than the number of hours. You might say I'm kind of a dinosaur, is that I was around at the beginning of breath work, which at that time was called rebirthing.
Mhm.
It's called rebirthing because when people would stay with an activated breath, they remembered everything in their life up to and including their birth, and sometimes even before their birth.
Mm.
And so then that became like the Holy Grail. Well, you've got to keep breathing until you remember your breath. I was like, oh, wait a minute, wait a minute. People are being healed all over the
I
place
remember that.
without having to remember their birth. But also, people are taking this power of this technique and using it in a very sketchy way. Now, you told me that you were going to ask me this question, so I'm going to use some very strong language here. Okay.
Okay, good.
We're ready.
Bring it.
Fasten our seatbelts.
The chief is speaking, everyone.
I don't think we're going to find a lot of argument here about people should be competently trained and people should have ethics. And there should even be an organization which helps to monitor that. There will be people who argue with it. And I got into the mental health business from the ground up. I was an attendant on the wards. And these were the locked wards of mental institutions. I saw what happened with people when they were labeled, when they were put in chemical straitjackets, and when they were not misunderstood. And I saw how people often were treated. And so there were indeed true healers who were people who would continue to own their own stuff and work on it. But then there's also power seekers who like to control others. And being in a position where you have a technique and you're the healer and they're the client, and they got off on that power. There's also self-aggrandizers who project symptoms on others and avoid self-awareness. Ah, I'm healthy now. Come, all ye sick and downtrodden people. Let me lay hands on you.
Oh my gosh.
And gave a great sense of pride to them. And then there's also just misguided people who are convinced easily that eliciting drama promotes healing. So let's get a lot of screaming going.
Right.
And believe me, I've experimented with all various sorts of with primal scream and with all of those things. It's I can say it's my duty to at least experience, not just sit in the bleachers and criticize. But what I witnessed with that was after a year, people were screaming about the same thing they were a year ago. And they got off on this
cursing their anger.
Screaming, but very little integration or moving on from that. So it's really important that we have quality schools here now. People that have, you say, been around the block, who have the humility to know that they don't know the answers for everyone, but they have tools that can help guide people to find their own answers. And they have the courage to say, when, okay, this looks like it's going off the track here.
It's so important. That's why we have supervision in our programs, and we have mentoring, and we have reality checks, you know, to keep checking in. And this is so important right now with so many kind of fallen teachers or the misuse of power and the guru system, that we come forward in an ethical, humble, and very human way, and that we have checks and balances to keep us clear with our clients. I can't thank you enough for your journey, Jim, and for what you're bringing forth and what you're imparting to all of us today. Really moving.
I said my mission is, yes, to spread the technique of breath work, but also my selfish mission is to have playmates. You know,
we're your playmates. It's no fun to do it alone, is it?
Yeah, I feel right at home.
Oh, is there one more nugget of wisdom that you can give us before we acknowledge you? I'm gonna put you on the spot. I love putting you on the spot.
Trust the breath. That is our teacher. We're all working for the same boss.
Exactly.
So it's not about a particular.
The breath is our CEO, right?
It's about coming back and connecting directly with source.
Right.
That's the only reason
what it is.
Breath work.
Thank you.
And there are many roads up the mountain. So breath work isn't the only one of them.
Right.
In fact, I encourage people to combine the skills that they already have with breath work.
That's what we do too.
Throw everything else out the window.
No, it all comes, breath brings it all together. That's what I've experienced. Breath brings all your skills together. We just love you, Jim. Thank you so
You're
much.
Such a sweetheart,
blessing
gentle,
us.
generous. We love you so much.
For inviting me to your community.
Jim has so many amazing resources on his
Yeah.
website, and he's just a font of knowledge and wisdom. So go check him out. Bye, Jim.